Me. The 1960s were really a revolutionary time with style and music. With a new generation looking to break out of the mold, and the older groups trying to hang on to tradition. AIE. It really was a cultural collision in slow motion, and you can feel it when you watch footage from that era. The 60s weren't just a decade, they were a pressure cooker where everything, music, fashion, politics, identity, was being renegotiated in real time. A decade split in two. Early 60s. Clean-cut pop groups. Matching suits. Crooner vocals. Dance-friendly TV shows. Late 60s. Psychedelia. Feedback, distortion, and experimentation. Anti-war lyrics. Counterculture fashion. Youth movements pushing against every norm. It's no wonder audiences sometimes looked confused. They were watching the ground shift under their feet. Music as the battleground. Bands like the Monks, the Velvet Underground, the Stooges, and Love were basically saying, "We're done with the old rules." Meanwhile, older acts and TV producers were still trying to preserve the polished, safe version of pop music. That tension created some of the most fascinating moments in music history, like when a proto-punk band would show up on a variety show, and the dancers had no idea how to move to it. Style was just as radical. Mini skirts. Long hair on men. Tie-dye. Mod fashion. Black turtlenecks and sunglasses. And later, the beginnings of what would become punk aesthetics. It was rebellion expressed through fabric and haircuts. Why it still feels so electric today? Because it was the first time youth culture had enough power socially and economically to reshape the mainstream instead of just reacting to it. The older generation wasn't ready, and the younger generation wasn't asking permission. Me. I remember sitcoms from the 60s put down beautiful, stylish, new fashions that would still look great today, and telling their kids not to be a part of it. AIE. It's such a fascinating dynamic, isn't it? Those sitcoms accidentally became time capsules of a generational tug of war. In so many 60s shows, you see this pattern. Parents clinging to the 1950s. Sitcom parents were written to represent respectability. Conservative clothes. Short haircuts. Pearls and sweater vests. A fear of anything that looked too modern or expressive. Writers leaned into that because it made the parents the straight man in the comedy. Kids embracing the new world. Meanwhile, the younger characters were often dressed in mod dresses. Bold patterns. Go-go boots. Longer hair. Bright colors. Early counterculture influences. And the parents' reactions were always exaggerated for laughs. "You're not going out dressed like that. What will the neighbors think? You look like one of those beatniks." What's funny is that the fashions the parents mocked, the sleek mod silhouettes, the geometric prints, the bold makeup, are exactly the styles that still look fresh and runway ready today. Sitcoms weren't just comedy, they were cultural negotiation. Writers were basically staging the real tension happening in living rooms across North America. Youth culture was exploding. Tradition was trying to hold the line. Fashion became the battleground. And because sitcoms had to stay safe, they often sided with the parents, even while showcasing the very styles that would define the decade. The irony. The rebellious outfits the shows tried to poke fun at. They're the ones that aged the best. Meanwhile, the parents' conservative looks feel more dated than ever. Me. I really do think there were some very cool minimalistic styles in the 60s, cars were sleeker and smaller than the later 70s yacht-size cars. Ties became thinner, Suits were sleeker. AIE. You're tapping into something real. The 60s had this crisp, modernist confidence that still feels fresh today. It was a decade where design suddenly got clean, geometric, and intentional, and you can see it across everything from fashion to cars to furniture. Cars, sleek, compact, and futuristic. 60s cars had lower profiles, sharper lines, chrome used as an accent, not a costume, proportions that felt sporty rather than bloated. Think early Mustangs, Jaguars, Beetles, Minis, even everyday sedans had a kind of aerodynamic optimism. By the mid-70s, everything ballooned into those giant land yachts, partly because of safety regulations, partly because of styling trends, and partly because bigger was seen as more luxurious. The 60s, though, they were all about movement and efficiency. Menswear, the rise of minimalism. You nailed it, the shift was dramatic. Early 60s. Thin lapels. Narrow ties. Fitted suits. Clean silhouettes. Monochrome or simple patterns. It was the era of mod fashion, where everything looked sharp and intentional. Even everyday office wear had that sleek, almost architectural quality. Late 60s. Things got bolder, wider collars, brighter colors, but the cut still stayed relatively slim until the 70s blew everything up into flares and giant lapels. Design as a whole was changing. The 60s embraced Scandinavian minimalism, Bauhaus influence, space-age curves, simple color blocking, functional shapes. It was a decade obsessed with the future, and it shows. Why it still looks good today? Because the 60s were designing forward, not backward. They weren't nostalgic, they were imagining what life could look like. That's why so much of it still feels modern. Even furniture, especially kitchen furniture, minimalistic with chrome accents. AIE. You're absolutely right, 60s kitchen furniture is one of the purest expressions of that sleek, optimistic minimalism the decade became known for. It's funny how people often think of the 60s as psychedelic, but the real design language of the era, especially in kitchens, was clean, modern, and almost futuristic. Here's what made it so distinctive. Minimalism with purpose. 60s kitchen design wasn't minimal just to look cool, it was tied to a whole cultural shift. Efficiency. Cleanliness. Modern living. The space-age aesthetic. Cabinets were flat-fronted, hardware was subtle, and everything aimed to look streamlined. Furniture, sleek, geometric, and chrome-accented. This is where the 60s really shine. You'd see chrome-legged dinette sets with simple vinyl or laminate tops. Tulip chairs and pedestal tables, Eero Saarinen's influence everywhere. Stackable molded chairs in bold but solid colors. Slim, tubular steel frames instead of bulky wooden legs. It all felt light, airy, and futuristic, a huge contrast to the heavy, carved wood furniture that dominated earlier decades. Kitchens embraced the space age. Appliances and furniture often had brushed aluminum, chrome trim, rounded corners, glossy enamel finishes, geometric handles. Even the color palettes were modern: whites, soft pastels, avocado, turquoise, and pops of red or orange. Why it still looks good today? Because it was designed around simplicity, clean lines, functional shapes. That's exactly what modern minimalism is built on. A 1965 chrome-legged dinette set could walk into a 2026 condo kitchen and look completely at home. And then the 70s came along. Suddenly, everything got heavier. Wood paneling took over. Colors got earthier. Chrome disappeared under layers of brown and gold. It's almost like the 60s were imagining the future, and the 70s were retreating back into the forest. Me? Yes. What happened in the 70s? Why did everything get bulkier, bigger and almost obscene? AIE. The shift from the sleek, modern 60s to the oversized, earthy, almost excessive 70s wasn't random, it was a perfect storm of cultural, economic, and aesthetic forces all colliding at once. When you line them up, the transformation actually makes a lot of sense. Let's break down why everything suddenly got bigger, bulkier, darker, and louder. 1. The optimism of the 60s collapsed. The 60s were all about the space age, modernism, clean lines. The future is bright. But by the early 70s, the mood had changed dramatically. Vietnam dragged on. Watergate shattered trust. The energy crisis hit. Inflation soared. People weren't dreaming about the future anymore, they were retreating inward. Design followed that emotional shift. 2. A return to earthiness. The 70s embraced wood paneling, shag carpet, earth tones, brown, mustard, avocado, burnt orange. Heavy, rustic furniture. It was almost a rejection of the shiny, chrome, futuristic 60s. People wanted warmth, nature, and comfort, even if it meant drowning in brown. 3. Cars got bigger because bigger equals safer plus more luxurious. A few things happened. New safety regulations added weight. Engines got larger to compensate. Luxury became associated with size. Gas was cheap, until 1973, so no one cared about efficiency. The result? Massive sedans, giant bumpers, and cars that looked like floating living rooms. 4. Fashion swung toward exaggeration. The 60s were tight, tailored, and geometric. The 70s said, let's go wild. Huge collars. Wide lapels. Flared pants. Platform shoes. Oversized patterns. It was maximalism as rebellion, a reaction to the minimalism that came before. 5. Furniture followed the same bigger is better logic. Instead of sleek chrome and molded plastic, the 70s brought chunky wood, thick upholstery, oversized sofas, deep, heavy colors, textured fabrics everywhere. It was cozy, but also visually heavy, like everything was padded for emotional protection. Multiple musical notes. 6. Cultural fragmentation. The 60s had a unified modern aesthetic. The 70s exploded into subcultures. Hippie, disco, glam, early punk, bohemian, rustic revival. Each had its own look, and many of them leaned toward boldness and excess. 7. The pendulum effect. Design always swings. 50s, structured, conservative. 60s, sleek, futuristic. 70s, earthy, oversized, expressive. 80s, neon, angular, loud. 90s, minimalist again. The 70s were the natural overcorrection to the clean, modern 60s. Why it feels obscene in hindsight? Because the 60s aged gracefully, its minimalism still feels modern. The 70s went all in on trends that were very of their moment. But that's also what makes the 70s fascinating, it was a decade that wore its emotions on its sleeve. Me. Although the 60s went into a minimalist stylish revolution, there was a bit of a drawback. I remember someone from that era talk about how older artisan handcrafted solid wood furniture, that would be considered beautiful antiques today, were literally thrown into fires to make way for the new materials, mainly Formica. That absolutely happened, and it's one of the most bittersweet ironies of the 1960s design revolution. The shift toward sleek, modern, space-age materials didn't just introduce new styles, it actively replaced older craftsmanship. And in the process, a lot of irreplaceable pieces were lost. Why beautiful antique furniture got tossed? A few forces collided at once. One, modernism made old furniture look outdated overnight. To a 1960s homeowner, ornate wood carving, heavy Victorian silhouettes, dark finishes, felt like relics of their grandparents' world. The new ideal was clean lines, light colors, chrome, laminate, geometric shapes. So people didn't just store the old stuff, they purged it. Formica and laminate felt futuristic. These materials were easy to clean, bright and glossy, cheap, space age. Compared to that, solid wood seemed old-fashioned and impractical. Storage space was limited. Most homes didn't have basements full of shelving or climate-controlled storage. If you wanted the new look, something had to go. And unfortunately, going often meant curbside, donation, or, as you heard, straight into the fire. People genuinely didn't think these pieces would ever be valuable again. For the 60s were about breaking from the past. It wasn't just a style shift, it was a cultural one. Young families wanted to define themselves as modern, not traditional. Getting rid of old furniture was symbolic, almost like shedding an old identity. The irony today. The very pieces that were tossed, hand-carved, solid hardwood, dovetail joints, artisan-made, are now museum pieces, heirlooms, highly collectible, often worth thousands. Meanwhile, much of the 60s laminate furniture didn't survive because it wasn't built to last. It's a reminder of how design trends can erase history. Every generation has its blind spots. The 60s were so focused on the future that they didn't realize they were discarding treasures. Wow, what a decade. Sounds scary and exciting at the same time. It really was both. That's what makes the 60s feel so electric even now. It was a decade where everything familiar was being questioned, redesigned, or outright blown up, and people were living through that shift without knowing where it would land. The scary part: old social norms were collapsing. Politics were turbulent. Technology was advancing faster than people could process. Generations were openly clashing. The future felt unpredictable. For someone who grew up in the 40s or 50s, the 60s must have felt like the world was tilting under their feet. The exciting part: music was reinventing itself every year. Fashion was breaking rules instead of following them. Design was futuristic and bold. Youth culture had real power for the first time. People felt like they could reshape society. There was this sense that anything could happen, and a lot of it did. Why the 60s still fascinate us? Because it was a decade where creativity exploded, tradition cracked, the future arrived early, and people were trying to navigate all of that in real time, with no roadmap. It's rare for a society to experience that much transformation that quickly. The 60s were messy, brilliant, chaotic, stylish, idealistic, and contradictory, and that's exactly why they still feel alive today. If you want, we can zoom in on any part of that decade: music, fashion, cars, design, politics, counterculture, and explore how it all fit together. Me. Where would I look if I wanted to immerse myself with the fashion and styles of the sleek minimalist 1960s? AIE. If you want to truly immerse yourself in the sleek, minimalist side of 1960s style, the mod, space age, clean-lined aesthetic, there are some fantastic places to explore. And the search results give us a solid foundation to build from, especially around the key designers and movements of the era. 1. Start with the fashion history sources. These give you the big picture context and help you understand the different branches of 60s style. Great starting points. Fashion history timeline, FIT, excellent decade overview with images and context. Wikipedia's 1960s in fashion, surprisingly thorough, with references to mod, space age, and minimalist designers. These will help you distinguish early 60s Jackie Kennedy elegance, mid 60s mod minimalism, late 60s psychedelic / bohemian styles. You're specifically after that mid 60s sleekness. 2. Look up the designers who defined minimalist 60s style. These names are essential. Enrico Regis, the king of space age minimalism. White, silver, geometric cuts, A-line dresses. PVC, clean lines, futuristic vibes. Pierre Cardin, sculptural silhouettes. Monochrome palettes. Architectural tailoring. Mary Quant, more playful, but still very clean and modern. Miniskirts, bold color blocking. Rudy Gernreich, ultra minimal, body conscious, experimental. Search their runway archives, museum collections, and retrospectives. 3. Watch 1960s TV and film that showcased mod minimalism. These are goldmines for the exact aesthetic you're describing. British swinging London films. Blow Up, 1966. The Knack, and How to Get It, 1965. Alfie, 1966. TV shows. The Avengers, Emma Peel's wardrobe is peak mod minimalism. UFO, 1970, but pure 60s futurism. The Prisoner, clean, geometric, surreal. These shows are basically moving fashion catalogs. 4. Explore vintage fashion archives and shops. Even if you're not buying, these sites curate authentic 60s pieces. ETSE vintage shops, search 1960s mod dress or Correges style. First Dibs, high-end designer vintage. The Vintage Fashion Guild, excellent reference library. You'll see real examples of A-line dresses, monochrome suits, chrome-accented accessories, geometric handbags. 5 books that focus on 60s modernism. Look for The 60s, Fashion Revolution. Mary Quant, Fashion Icon. Pierre Cardin, Future Fashion. The Fashion of Enrico Regis. These are filled with photographs and design philosophy. 6 museums with strong 60s collections. Many museums have online archives. The Met Costume Institute. V&A Museum, London. Museum of Fit. Search their collections for Correges, Cardin, Quant, 1960s mod, Space Age Fashion. 7 Pinterest and Instagram mood boards. Search terms like 1960s mod fashion, Space Age Fashion 60s. Correges Style. 60s Minimalism. You'll get endless, curated boards of clean silhouettes, geometric dresses, monochrome palettes, chrome accessories. Me. Sounds great, stay cool daddy-o. Ciao for now. AIE. Catch you later, cool cat, glide on outta here like it's still 1966. Whenever you want to drop back into the groove, I'll be right here, ready to spin the next track of our time travel chat. Ciao for now.